Well, the Revelation 14 is one of the most important chapters to us as God's people. It, of course, is the chapter that has the message that's to go to the whole world. But it doesn't begin that way, does it? It doesn't begin with the message. It begins with a description of a people. And it begins or follows the description of what's going to happen in our world. It's a very sad scene. You know, when you look at Revelation 13 and the two superpowers in the world is, well, let's look at that. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 14. And he, the second beast, does what? He deceives them. If you look at verse 12, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him and does what? Causes the earth. Do you know that most of the world is going to wonder after the beast because you got some who wonder after the beast, but some are caused to wonder after the beast. People are deceived to worship the beast. And you've got to wonder what's going on in the mind. It doesn't seem like they know where they're going, right? To live a life where you're caused to do something, you're deceived to do something, you're wandering after the beast and worshiping the beast instead of worshiping God. And what a difference just in the concept of mentality, just mental health. Revelation 14:12, the other side, the other thinking group of people. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are they keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Does that sound like they know what they're doing? They're choosing to keep something. The other side's being deceived and is being caused. Here's a group of people who are choosing, making a choice to keep the commandments of God patiently because they're facing opposition. They know exactly what's happening. They're keeping it under, knowingly, this oppression or persecution or the other word I'm trying to think of, just opposition to them. And the faith of Jesus. If you have the faith of Jesus, do you know what you're doing? Absolutely. I mean, you've got almost an entire world that really doesn't know what they're doing. And a small group of people who know exactly what they're doing. It's all a matter of perspectives, which we were talking about this morning. All a matter of perspective. And so when we go back to Revelation 14, verse 1, and I looked, and so after he had seen this terrible scene of Revelation 13, and it looks like the two beasts have basically controlled the world and they're winning, the Holy Spirit says, John, I want you to look somewhere else now. I don't want you to look at what's happening, what's going to happen to God's people. I want you to look at what happens in the end. After the fearful scenes of Revelation 13, and he says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 having his Father's name written in their foreheads. If you were John and you just saw Revelation 13, and think about what you would feel, and then you look at this other scene, it changes things, doesn't it? What a blessed people. They took their stand, couldn't buy and sell, took their stand, and they're with Jesus for forever. Wow. So who are you feeling sorry for at this point? The world. And I think that's part of us being moved by the Holy Spirit, that to receive the seal of God is to sigh and cry for the abominations that are in the church and in the world. And you start growing instead of being, seeing people as enemies. Your heart goes out because this is the only life they're going to know. That's all they're going to know. And so your heart starts changing. We got to warn these people. You see? And that, of course, that's what the rest of Revelation 14 is. They just got to know. Because right now, they have no earthly idea what's about ready to happen. Just like the time of Noah. The time of God's visitation is right at hand, and the people of Noah's time weren't ready because of their perspective was wrong. They had imbibed in too much, drank too much air And all that air made them drunk. And they didn't even know what they were doing. And this is why God's people have to be sober-minded, to perceive exactly what's happening in the world, to know the times in which we live, and to know God and to know His message is everything. And when you look at this 144,000, and again, just in review, lo means behold, means to observe. Observe, John, look, behold, a lamb stands on Mount Zion. Because they're victorious. And here Satan had misrepresented God as a tyrant, but here he is as a king, because the word, as we saw, stood, we're referring more to his being a king. And who's your king? It's the Lamb. The Lamb is my king. In Revelation 13, who was the world's king? The two beasts. Who's the tyrant? The beasts were. Wouldn't allow people to buy and sell. Perspective. Imagine people living in a world and their king is these apostate Protestants in the Church of Rome. But we know that can't be your king. It's got to be a lamb. The self-sacrificing Lamb of God has to be our king, which tells us that that's his kingdom. And to be part of that kingdom, we have to be like lambs, don't we? Lamb-like, Christ-like. And so as we saw in this verse, we're to observe, we're to look and see Jesus. We're to see Jesus standing on Mount Zion, but he's not alone. There's 144,000 standing with him. And as we go on and read through these verses, because they did what? They followed him wherever he went. Whatever he did, whatever he said, whatever he thought, this is what they chose. This is what they want. And this is where we left off. Now, having the Father's name written in their foreheads. Now, in Sons and Daughters of God, the devotional, page 370, this name is the symbol which the apostles saw in vision and signifies the yielding of the mind to intelligent and loyal obedience to all of God's commandments. Okay? That's exactly what it is. This equals this. Now, there's a couple words there. It wasn't just loyal obedience. It was intelligent obedience. Which means that I think those who keep the commandments of God in the faith of Jesus have a deeper understanding of each one of those 10 commandments. If you were to ask most people, what do these 10 commandments mean? Give me a definition of thou shalt not bear false witness. The commandments are broad, the Bible says, and they're deep. We need to study further into what does that really mean if I'm going to stand on Mount Zion? If I'm going to have my Father's name, which is intelligent and loyal obedience to all of his commandments, means that I must spend a little time digging a little deeper. Now, if you were to get the book Patriarchs and Prophets, beginning on page 305, Sister White begins to describe or define each one of those 10 commandments. And when you look at those definitions, you realize how much deeper they really are about what does it mean not to bear false witness. That you would never ever give a false impression. Not just by your words, but even by your expression, your looks. That you would always tell the truth. That you'd never give an exaggeration. You imagine what that would be like? To live a life that you tell people exactly how big that fish is that you caught? It wasn't like this. It was really like this. And you would love to talk that way. You want to talk that way. It's your joy to always be transparent, to always tell the truth. You hunger to be like that. See, I think that's what it means to be intelligent and loyal, is that you know exactly what it means to not bear false witness. You know exactly what it means, thou shalt not steal. You would never, ever take advantage of another human being. You would be giving You would always be fair. But we live in a world in which people's weakness is taken advantage, people's ignorance is taken advantage of. Isn't that right? That is the world we live in. And you begin to hate that and start feeling sorry for people who live that way because it's the only life they're ever going to know. But if God's people can get a deeper glimpse of those 10 commandments intelligently, would we even be more likely to go out and share it? Because we'd see how much further away the world really is. And that's part of the deception of Laodicea, isn't it? The world, the church become a little bit more like the world, and it doesn't seem to be so much difference. And we're blinded by this. But if we get closer and closer to the throne, having the Father's name written on our foreheads, where the forehead becoming more intelligent about what it means to really follow the Lamb, about every one of God's commands as a promise, become more intelligent, we'd be more likely even to tell it to the world. You agree? Amen. Read you another statement here. This is Counsels on Stewardship, page 46. Unless the name of God is written in your forehead, written there because God is the center of your thoughts, you will not be meet for the inheritance in light. So to have the Father's name means yielding of the mind to intelligent and loyal obedience to all God's commandments, to have God as the center of your thoughts. That God becomes most and best in your life. But isn't that what the first commandment is? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You know, if we could always put God first, we'd keep the other 9. You know, because we'd have the right mind. That you would only do those things that makes you want to love God more, to want to serve Him more. So is there something I'm doing that's lessening my love for God? That would be breaking the first commandment. Could be conversations, could be health, could be anything I'm watching, anything that could diminish my love for God would be breaking that commandment and giving me a mindset, well, I'm not intelligently or I'm not making God the center of my thoughts. And so everything begins with what? Begins with a thought. And our thoughts turn into what? Actions. And actions turn into habits. And habits form character. Satan had all perfect thoughts at one time. And it was the introduction of that one erroneous thought. And of course, because you have an erroneous thought doesn't mean you've sinned. It just tells you where you need to go. You need to go to God. And think how all history would have been different. Once Lucifer had that one erroneous thought, if he had just gone to the Father and said, Father, I had a thought that I've never had ever in my life before. What's wrong? Would God have shown him the way? You see, the problem with a created being is that he can't save himself. He can't change himself. But when we get these thoughts, we can go to God who alone can cleanse us of it, reorganize our thoughts. But so often we get into this humanistic viewpoint, right? That we can save ourselves. We can even change our own thoughts. And I think that's generally why Christianity in general is lukewarm. Yeah, it's a little religious, just a little. Pray a little, study a little, give a little, but not a lot. But God has to be first, most, and best. Let's turn to Revelation chapter... the Father's name. We're still in the Father's name. Now, I want to read you something here. This is Prophets and Kings, page 591. Prophets and Kings, 591. While Satan had been urging his accusations, holy angels unseen have been passing to and fro, placing upon the faithful ones the seal of the living God. These are they that stand upon Mount Zion with the Lamb, having the Father's name written in their foreheads. So God has a true church that's out preparing people to receive the seal of God and having the Father's name written in their foreheads. Now this I thought was interesting. If you go to Revelation chapter 3, you're going to want to, of course, keep your finger in Revelation 14. But Revelation 3, and I want to read this verse 12. Revelation 3, verse 12. Because God does have this is one proof text for me that God has a true church in the world. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I'll write upon him the name of my God. Does that sound familiar? And the name of the city of my God, which is the New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I'll write upon him my new name. Which church is that under? It's Philadelphia. Isn't that interesting? That what we're ultimately studying about the 144,000, there's some similarity between them and the church of Philadelphia, which is the church that has no condemnation. The church of Philadelphia starts 1798 till, because it's the church of what? The church of brotherly love, but it's the beginning of what movement? Yeah, we're talking about when 1798 happened. This is what happened in history. 1798 is the fulfillment of what prophecy? The 1260-year prophecy. Okay, were there Christians who were anticipating this? Yeah. John Wesley wrote in his explanatory notes in 1754, knowing that the papacy, which was the first beast, would soon receive its deadly wound around 1798. He didn't know who the second beast was in 1754 because we didn't have our revolution until 1776. Isn't that interesting? He knew it was coming. He says the second beast is coming. He didn't know who it was. Because we hadn't even had our revolution yet. We hadn't even had our constitution or anything yet. So he didn't know. But he knew who the first beast was. And he knew it would receive a deadly wound. And when 1798 rolled around and the papacy receives its deadly wound, how many Protestants were interested in Bible prophecy? Just about everybody. They took an interest. And now that interest eventually flowed into the Great Awakening here in America. Eventually got people running to and fro, because that's really what running to and fro means in the book of Daniel. And knowledge was increased. It wasn't knowledge, computer knowledge. It was knowledge about Bible prophecy. And the great Bible society starting and so forth like that. So now people are studying the Bibles, and eventually there'd be a man named William Miller who would find another time prophecy. And things are getting pretty exciting. Because he's thinking 1844 is the end of the what? End of the world. I mean, and this is whose time period? Us, the Church of Bible Prophecy. But the description has some of those descriptions of the 144,000. And to me, it's almost like a way of saying God has our true church in the world. Because we're really the church of what? Philadelphia. That has now, we're in the time of Laodicea. Is that right? I mean, the church of Philadelphia is referring to our founding fathers of this church, the pioneers of this church. We're living in the time of Laodicea, but again, prophecy points to. And I think what God's saying, I needed a movement to have 144,000. I actually needed a church described as Philadelphia before I could get this 144,000. That's how important this church is. If God didn't raise up this church with this message, preaching the three angels' message, you wouldn't have 144,000 saints standing on Mount Zion. It's all part of God's plan. So this message, this movement, is part of God's plan. And I'm very thankful to be part of that. Now, I want to turn to something here in Revelation. Let's go back to Revelation 14 and now look at verse 2. And this is what was in great controversy. And I heard, now notice, and I'm going to ask you the question, whose voice this is. And I heard a voice from heaven as a voice of many waters. I'll stop right there. Any description of anybody? Voice of many waters? It's a description of Jesus, right? But listen, I heard a voice from heaven as a voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. Did we hear a description of the Father where he thunders from Mount Zion? Okay. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. Okay? Now I want to read you this. To me, this was pretty exciting. And our study really is the 144,000. So listen to this. I'm not sure what page number it is in the reel, but this is under the chapter God's People Delivered. Upon the crystal sea before the throne, that sea of glass as it were mingled with fire, so resplendent is it with the glory of God, are gathered the company that have gotten the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over the number of his name. With the Lamb upon Mount Zion, having the harps of God, they stand. The 144,000 that were redeemed from among men, and there is heard, now listen what she says, there is heard as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of a great thunder, the voice of harpers harping with their harps. So, let's go back to Revelation 14:2. And I heard a voice from heaven, as a voice of many waters, as a voice of a great thunder. Now, who's making the noise? It's the 144,000 with their harps. Can we read that again? Does that make sense?
It sounds like 3 different voices.
Okay. So I heard a voice from heaven, as a voice of many waters, as a voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. Okay, so it really says it in the text. I'm going to read from Spirit of Prophecy. It says, with the Lamb upon Mount Zion, having the harps of God. So who are we talking about? 144,000, right? They, 144,000, stand. The 144,000 that were redeemed from among men, and there is heard, as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of a great thunder, the voice of harpers harping with their harps. So what I'm suggesting here, which it sounds like to me, that the voice that you're hearing, they're speaking through their harps and harping in their music. It doesn't say they're not singing too, but it's this beautiful noise, not noise as in loud, but they're making some noise that most everybody's hearing, and the 144,000 are not just following Jesus wherever he goes. This group has harps, and they play in such a way that the Bible even refers to it as a voice from heaven. They will play like a voice from heaven. You see what I'm trying to say here? Anyway, and they're like the voice of many waters, and as a voice of a great thunder. And all these things are verses you can find applied to the Father or to the Son, but here we find actually applied to this one special group who could go through the time of the end as a time as there's never been, singing a song, the Song of Moses, that nobody else can sing. But when they play their harps, God's going to, I don't know how he amplifies it or how it happens, but it'll be like the sound of many waters. It'll be sweet, just as it comes from Jesus himself. Okay. Let's look at, is that right? John chapter 12, verse 28 and 29. You have to zoom along here, huh? Father, glorify thy name. Then came there a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it. The people, therefore, that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. Others said, an angel spake to him. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? A voice that, 28 and 29. Job 37, verses 4 and 5. Job 37, verses 4 and 5. After it a voice roareth, he thundereth with the voice of his excellency, and he will not stay them when his voice is heard. So the voice of God thundereth and so forth, and yet somehow this 144,000 with the harps have this same kind of sound. Just trying to point out how that much more special this group is that we should strive to be amongst. Fall in the Lamb wherever he goes and so forth. Psalm 29, verses 3 and 4. Psalm 29, verses 3 and 4. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. It sounds very beautiful, right? I mean, but if the same kind of terminology is applied to who? The 144,000 whom we studied earlier may be in fact replacing the positions of Lucifer and the fallen angels. That means there was a time when Lucifer, when he was loyal to God, he had a voice that was like many waters. He would have had a voice that kind of roareth in a good way, that kind of thundereth, had authority. People listened. And if, as we studied earlier, if the 144,000 are ultimately replacing Lucifer, the ones right around the throne, because they too will be on the sides of the north, when they play their harps and stuff, it'll be like many waters. It will be so, the world's going to want to hear. The universe will want to hear, is part of what I'm saying. Did we do Psalm? Yeah, we did that. Revelation 1:15. Of course, a description of Jesus here. Revelation 1:15. And his feet like unto fine brass, and as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And so it's like, well, I don't know what all that means. But many waters would be very soothing. It would, we'd have to really think about what does all that include? But when the 144,000 start playing their harps, it'd be like the sound of many waters. It'll be absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Satan was Lucifer's the head of the heavenly choir. These guys are going to be, the 144,000 are going to be very musical, right? Very musical. Ezekiel 43:2. Ezekiel chapter 43. Ezekiel 43 and verse 2. And behold, the glory of God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. And I don't know, the nice thing about that verse is it's kind of putting two thoughts together. The voice of many waters and the glory shining. And somehow I think that's why these people, this 144,000, are able to sound like many waters, because they did what? They had the glory of God. They shone with the very character and glory of God. And that is what gives you your voice. I think about it. The voice of one crying in the wilderness was because he was preparing the way for Jesus. It is a very interesting thought, isn't it? And if we really want to be a voice in the world, what do we need to do? We have to be more like Jesus. That's what gives us the voice. Like many waters. Okay? Let's go back to Revelation 14:3. How much time do I have? Where are we at? Because we're not... Okay. Right, well, I'll try to go quickly here. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And in Great Controversy, page 648, it very clearly says this is the song of their what? Their deliverance and their experience. Their experience. If we look at Psalm 98, verse 1, Psalm 98, verse 1. O sing unto the Lord a new song, for he hath done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm hath gotten him the victory. What's the connection here? Sing a new song because you have discovered what? You've discovered the victory through God's strong arm, not yours. That's what the singing's about. You know, you don't want to sing a song about how strong you are. Okay? You sing, the people who sing the song have finally allowed self to die. They sing the new song because they're finally broken on the rock. They sing this new song because they realize they can't personally keep the Ten Commandments by their own strength, but they sing a song because now, because of God's strong arm, they can. Right? And isn't that the whole message of 1888? The message of righteousness by faith? Isn't that exactly what God wanted to tell our people? Yeah, you've got to keep the commandments, but the only way you're going to sing a song is if you realize how powerful God is, which is also brings us right back to why we keep the Sabbath. It really points to whose power? God's power. Isaiah 52. Isaiah 52, verses 7 and 8. How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publisheth salvation, that saith unto Zion, thy God reigneth. Thy watchmen shall lift up the voice, with a voice together shall they sing, for they shall see eye to eye when the Lord shall bring again Zion. This is Isaiah chapter 52, verses 7 and 8. So we're just following this key word, right? The key word about a voice, the key word about lifting up our voice, like many waters and so forth. But what's associated with voice here for God's people? What's the new information? As we follow this key thought, these words. Huh? Okay. So part of learning a new song, of having a voice, is having feet that you take it to other people. That's got to be part of the song. You cannot sing a new song in some cloister little room. The song, part of the song of our experience, is not just about what God does inside of us. The song of our experience has to be as we were watchmen on the wall. But there's a couple thoughts here. It's publishing it, right? But you're also a watchman. What's a watchman do? Yeah, it looks out for the danger and warns other people. You know, part of your rich experience to be striving to be amongst those who play these instruments, it sounds like many waters, is to be a faithful watchman on the wall. I mean, if air comes into the church, you have to be a faithful watchman. If you want to have a voice that sounds like many waters, you can't keep silent. You have to publish truth. You have to be a faithful watchman on the wall. You got to be willing to take a stand for truth, which is exactly why you're here today. This is why you've existed all these years, to be a faithful watchman on the wall. And that gives you a voice that heaven loves to hear. I mean, we all physically have voices, but the voice of many waters, you see? If we go back to Revelation 14:3, and it says that the 144,000 were redeemed from the earth. And in Revelation 14:4, these were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from. So they're redeemed from the earth, and they're redeemed from among men. They're redeemed from the earth, redeemed from among men, which probably is an expression that talks about them actually being what? Alive, okay? Being translated, okay? I know there's a connection there, being redeemed from the earth, from amongst men. Can you think of somebody in history who, I've got to put a note down here, Hebrews 11:5. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Hebrews 11:5. Yeah, it's Enoch. By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. For behold, his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. But let me read you Patriarchs and Prophets 88 and 89. The godly character of this prophet represents the state of holiness which must be attained by those who shall be redeemed from the earth. That's talking about the 144,000, I think, in particular. As Enoch was translated to heaven before the destruction of the world by water, so the living righteous will be translated from the earth. So really, you've got 144,000 Enochs in the end of time. That's a pretty powerful movement, you know. Besides that numbered group, you have an innumerable amount of others who may not have reached the experience of Enoch, but at least the experience of the thief on the cross and anything in between, right? So, Revelation 14:4. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So here we go. These were they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God. Not defiled by women. In Revelation 18:4, in the fourth angel's message, it says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, that ye receive not of her plagues. So not being defiled by these women representing what? Churches in Bible prophecy, means that they're not partakers of her sins, really. They've remained themselves pure before God, not just physically in the sense of not participating in sin, but even doctrinally. They've not drunken of the wine of Babylon and are pure in doctrine. It says here in early writings, page 278, 279, servants of God, endowed with power from on high, with their faces lighted up and shining with holy consecration, went forth to proclaim the message from heaven. Souls that were scattered all through the religious bodies answered to the call, and the precious were hurried out of the doomed churches as Lot was hurried out of Sodom before her destruction. So God has a people. Babylon is fallen, and the fourth angel's message of Revelation 18 says, Come out of her, my people, because God has people in these fallen churches, but themselves are searching, okay? And will not be defiled, but to not be defiled means they have to, because there comes a point in time that to stay would be sin. It's not sin today. But there comes a point when all the religious bodies, right? The whole world wanders after the beast. The world's institutions are going to second. Yes, they can't buy and sell. Yes, they face a debt decree. You cannot be part of that. And so these people have to come out so as not to participate. Isn't that what happened with Christ's crucifixion? You had many secret followers of priests, but they did what? They came out. They couldn't be part of that anymore. And so they joined the ranks of God's persecuted church. Same thing's going to have to happen in the end of time. These people are just simply going to have to come out. So when he says they're not defiled by women, God's not trying to say anything about marriage here, is he? Because in God's eyes, marriage is not sin, right? So they follow the Lamb real quickly. Following the Lamb means that everything is subordinate to Christ. His guidance is chosen. His companionship is desired. Now they become the first fruits. But wasn't Christ the first fruit? Who was the wave sheaf? Jesus. So before there could be a harvest, so before the Hebrews could harvest their fields around Passover, they'd bring a wave sheaf. They'd bring their first fruits. And then once they brought their first fruits, then they could go back and reap their fields. Christ became the first fruit so there could be a what? There could be a harvest. Because if Christ be not raised, your faith is in vain. And yet the 144,000 are also called first fruits. But they're not the wave sheaf. There's a difference. The wave sheaf is none other but Christ. He was the wave sheaf of the Lord, right? All the things of the sanctuary pointed to him. But that doesn't mean there can't be another first fruits, not like Jesus, not like the first fruit, the wave sheaf, of which all resurrections are hinged on. But in the end, there's going to be a what? There's going to be a harvest. The second coming is like a harvest. He sends his angels out. But before you have a harvest, you always have a first fruit. And so what the Bible, I think, is saying here in Revelation 14 is before there can be the harvest of all those who've been faithful through the ages, Jesus isn't coming until he has a first fruit. Until he has the 144,000, we're still here. Does that make sense? And that way they're a first fruit. So let's finish this last verse real quick. Revelation 14:5. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne. And Psalm 34:13. Psalm 34:13. Keep thy tongue from evil and thy lips from speaking guile. Now, when I speak, it's an expression of what's in my heart and mind, right? If I'm thinking something and I say it, and I'm more likely to do it again? What if I'm thinking something evil, but I don't say it? Huh? It's okay. I still got to deal with the thought. But by giving expression to it, by giving into it, I made it actually even a more part of me, didn't I? I actually wound up producing the fruit of this bad tree inside. But we can see where we don't just want to get rid of the bad fruit. We don't just not want to say it. We want the evil tree chopped down. Because we really don't want to have those thoughts anymore that tempt us to say it. We want God to plant a new tree in our heart. Yeah, that give me different kinds of thoughts, a different kind of fruit. Okay? Very good. James 3:2. So I'm trying to cut this short here. James 3:2. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the body. Well, that's quite a principle. I read that again. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Everything Jesus said was the truth and was redemptive, right? Was kind, was out of love, was just the perfect thing to say because his heart was perfectly clean. Okay? We can learn things about our heart by our speech. But it is good to bridle the tongue. Yes?
126 says, any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart. This man is religious.
Yeah. Is it possible to bridle your tongue in public but not in private? Absolutely. So true religion ultimately is to bridle your tongue when nobody can even hear you. Can't hear it yourself. You know, the thoughts come to mind, but you say, I'm not giving into it. I'm not going to express it with my voice. I don't want to think that anymore. But this is what drives us what? Back to God. Yes?
James 3, verse 8.
Okay.
But the tongue no man can tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison.
Oh, boy. You did have to read that, didn't you? Yeah. But that tells us that we can't save ourselves. I can't even correct my own speech. But what I can do to this base paint is I can take this word and I can keep putting blue drops of paint in it if blue represents truth. And if I keep adding blue paint, drip, dry, drip, right? Drop by drop, will it affect my speech? It will affect my speech. You know, one of the surest ways of knowing that you're drifting away, not even knowing it, is just listen to yourself talk. And if you find yourself giving in to speech that isn't representative of God, you're probably going to find out, you know something? I haven't been praying like I should be praying. I haven't been studying like I should be studying. I haven't been witnessing like I should be witnessing. And if I would do the thing God asked me to do, I'm not going to find myself tempted to say these things. I might be tempted, but I'm not as likely to give in, right? Because the speech is there because we've already expressed it, but we don't have to give in to it. We can just keep adding seeds that changes our perception to want to do what God does. And I think one of the reasons God paints this, and let me just close with this. God tells us, gives us this picture of Revelation 13, which absolutely is horrifying. That the whole world would get to a point where they would persecute a group of people, even women and children, just because they worship on a different day. That they would get to the absolute insanity of believing that somehow they're going to correct the world's problems by getting rid of a very small group of people that they will admit, your group is small. You have no power. You can't even buy and sell. Look at yourselves. And yet at the same time, even admitting that, the only way we're going to stave off this wrath of God is to get rid of you. And there's not a rational thought in that. It's all based on false ideas. And that's why they're going to do it. Because they're not reading this. Or they're reading this only to find text that kind of proof text for their ideas. But God says, look, that's not the last word. And before I tell you what I want you to preach, the three angels' messages that starts in verse 6, I just want you to take a moment and look at Revelation 14:1 and see the Lamb on Mount Zion and 144,000. And if I have a people who strive to be amongst them, this message will go. But if I don't have this people, the message that starts in verse 6 doesn't go. Does that make sense? Before the message goes, you got to have a group of people who are striving to be amongst the people in the first 5 verses. I mean, it goes somewhat out there, but it never gets finished. It will never get finished until the first 5 verses are fulfilled. Then verse 6 and on, then gets fulfilled. Does that make sense? So, may God bless us. May we covet the companionship of Jesus. May we daily add that blue paint of truth to the base paint. No more red, no more sin, no more sinful thoughts. Just allow the good to overcome the evil even within inside ourselves.